Welcome to Resiliency Redefined. I'm your host, Robyne, and I am thrilled to share with you information about resiliency, well-being, performance, education, business, parenting, and everything in between. I'm committed to joining you each week to talk about these big ideas and bring them into action, habits, tools, strategies, tactics that allow us to finally uncover what it takes to truly be well. And I'm just so excited that you're here. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Resiliency Redefined. So today is actually the first time I'm joining you for an episode on the road. Usually I get to record from my home space. However, this week it was much easier to facilitate this conversation on the road. So I am joining you today in, of course, a Marriott hotel room, and I'm excited to have this conversation and continue this conversation around the value and the role of self-care. Now, last day I introduced you to an acronym called EASE, which talks about this idea about energy, accessibility, satisfying, and everyday. So when things are a lot and we are showing up to try our best to just hang tight, to be able to keep doing the good work, the idea is to use the acronym EASE. So matching things that I have the energy for, being able to have access to things that are reasonable. So we're not creating boundaries and creating roadblocks and obstacles in whatever it is that we are trying to do, ensuring, especially when things are hard, that we are finding things that are satisfying. Now, there's a lot of things that we can do, and maybe we'll feel better in 21 days or 60 days. The idea when things are heavy, you want things immediately that are going to feel beneficial and satisfying, especially things that add an element of soothing. And the E, again, for everyday. Consistency compounds. I've said this before, and it's so important, I'll say it again. The habits make up the quality of your life. So doing something each and every day, maybe it's not going to help feel better in the moment. I appreciate that. A lot of times when we're using the practice of ease, what we're trying to do is backstopping things from getting any worse. So when we talk about a few more ideas around self-care, the first idea I want to share with you here is the idea that so many of us are overworked and under-rested, and understanding the overworkedness. What are the parts that actually need recovery? To give you the example, I noticed just recently that physically I wasn't tired. Emotionally, I was feeling really tired. Emotionally, I noticed my feelings needed a wee bit of a rest. And when I did a deep dive to notice, like, where is this emotional storm coming from? I realized it had a lot to do with my thinking. My habits of mind slipped a little bit, and I noticed that my thinking was becoming very all or nothing. Now, we talk about these as cognitive distortions, and there's a few kind of popular ones, let's say, that people use. A big one in these mental traps, or what we call these distortions. And again, this isn't really complicated in the sense of like, oh, I have disordered thinking. They're just habits of mind that we have developed that perhaps don't set us up for success. So again, they're called cognitive distortions. It's not that we are distorted. It just means that how we take in information, or perhaps when we're feeling under-resourced, some of the patterns we might replicate or follow or repeat. So I noticed for me, there was a lot of all or nothing thinking. Either I had to get it done perfectly or not at all. Like I was in this tension between trying to do way too many things and recognizing that I didn't have the energy necessarily to back it up. And then instead of feeling, wow, I noticed I got, most of the things done because I didn't get everything done. I felt as though I didn't complete enough for it to be worthwhile for me to feel satisfied. So again, that all or nothing thinking. It's also sometimes referred to as black and white thinking. But again, I noticed my mind was what was the antecedent or the pre-event that was making my emotions feel tired. So my invitation for you is to notice what area, if we do need some rest and recovery, what areas are pretty tender? What are the areas that will make a big difference? Because if my emotions were tired and all I was doing were exercises and practices to help my body physically rest, literally like lying flat, or perhaps just doing really nice stretching, or perhaps going for soft tissue work, whatever that might be. If my thinking was still really stormy, which was triggering my emotions, the body work might not work the way that I want it to if I don't address really what's going on. So maybe we need an emotional rest. Maybe you notice that emotions are okay, body is okay, but it's your thinking self, it's the cognitive rest. I know for me, I notice that tension when I'm so exhausted and I can't make another decision. So last week, when I had lots on my plate, let me tell you, the thing that caused me the greatest grief in my week was making dinner. I had even said to Jeff, I'm like, I can't believe that the most difficult thing that I'm stick handling right now is trying to think what to make for supper. Oh, I never realized that I would have to make meals for people in perpetuity. And again, I wasn't physically tired. I wasn't emotionally tired at this point. I was thinking tired. My tiredness was coming from making decisions. So, my gentle invitation, if you notice you are tired of making decisions, that's a cognitive fatigue, finding ways to simplify, finding ways to simplify the decision-making process. Something else that I know about a lot of people I get to work with is their 5 o'clock energy around thinking and problem solving. It's all spent at that point. You've already spent that. Your currency, you're on zero. But perhaps your morning energy, or maybe earlier in the week, having a wee bit of a map can help minimize the need for decision making. So again, when we think about our self-care, we want it to match the type of renewal, restoration, the feeling of resourcedness that we need. Another big idea I would love to share with you about self-care. And this was first inspired, I believe, after I read Danielle Laporte's book around the desire map or the destiny map. I need to check back on that. But she introduced this concept that I have seen implemented in many different places, but she was the original source for me anyway, about moving away from goal setting, as in, like, this is my self-care goal and this is what I'm going to do. And she introduced me to this idea around feeling setting. How is it that I want to feel? And something that I see in my work, and I know personally, when I have clarity on the feeling that I'm looking for, and then I go out and I design a habit, a ritual, a practice that makes spaciousness possible for that feeling to grow, that is where I get the best return on my investment of time. So if you just take a moment and, wherever you are, if it's safe to do so, just take a moment and ask yourself, how would I like to feel right now? How am I feeling? How would I like to feel? And can you get just a wee bit of clarity on how is it that you want to feel? We move so quickly. We are at such a pace of showing up in our lives that I think it's really hard for our intuition, our deep knowing, to get any airtime. There's so much noise, there's so much negativity, there's so much worry. We're just moving so quickly. We don't slow down, I think, often enough to actually trust and listen to our intuition, the part of us that knows what it needs, the part of us that knows what is required for us to feel okay. Now, the intuition, it's so fascinating because in our culture, and I've seen this in my own lived experience, that emotion seems sometimes like a second-class citizen to logic, right? And I know the Stoics, they're getting all, it's like they're on a comeback tour. But what's fascinating to me is that logic, reason, critical thinking, all of these higher order operations are perceived in this hierarchy. And then next is emotion. And then below emotion is intuition. However, intuition, I think, is one of our strongest drivers of looking after ourselves. It is the part of us that is our first line of defense. It's the part of us that wants to look after ourselves, to protect ourselves, to make sure we are okay. We try to outthink stress. That's an intellectual process. We try to outthink it. We use that classic when then trap. When I get through the season, then I'm going to take care of myself. Or emotions, we try to ignore and override, right? These pesky little, non-reliable, not valid, pesky little molecules create so much noise. And again, we don't give a lot of credence to our emotions, even though we know emotion very much makes up our lived experience. And then under that, here's the intuition. Now, I recently heard a person talking about the fact that we have been ignoring our intuition for so long, we wouldn't even recognize it anymore. And I agree with that to a point. Yes, I think we're ignoring our intuition, but I do believe we can recognize it quite readily when we slow down. I was talking to a very dear friend of mine, Peter Katz, and I remember sitting in Halifax, and we were talking about this idea of how do you know what is your truest self, the wisdom, that deep intuition. And we both reflected on coming upon the same answer in different places and ways about our inner voice that is the gentlest, that is the kindest, that is the most loving, is your intuition. The criticalness, the judgment, so often, even that inner voice, that inner critic, have you noticed it sounds like somebody in your life? Maybe it sounds like a difficult sibling. Maybe it sounds like a difficult parent or a bad boss. That inner critic, that is not your voice. That is something that we've been conditioned or groomed to experience. That kind, gentle, soft voice, that's your inner knowing. And that intuition is so wise. Are you ready to receive? I appreciate that people are giving and doing and outputting like in such a big way right now. And it's contributing to our burnout on a significant level. And what I'm excited to tell you about on July 8th for our next iteration of our Stress Wisely Labs, this is all about learning to receive. Opening yourself up to the opportunity for recovery, for rest, for renewal, using the season of summer to receive all of the good that is out there so that way you can feel well resourced, be ready and steady for whatever comes your way. So again, the next iteration of our Stress Wisely Labs is just around the corner, and we are about filling you back up with energy, good ideas, research-informed practices that will help you make the most of the beautiful season that is summer. And we've saved you a seat. I'm looking forward to having you there. Please check out the website for all of the information and know that this is the time where you get to get that bucket filled back up so we can continue to do the good work for ourselves and for others. So July 8th, I'll see you there. I look forward to our time together. Bye for now. Here's another example that I thought was so significant about our intuition and trusting our bodies know what it needs to recover. Our bodies will find a winning strategy. They know what they need to be able to feel well. But this idea that I thought was so fascinating, and it was talking about women specifically, that we have ignored our intuition, not because we don't value it, but we've been conditioned and socialized to. And the example the person shared was this, that, how many times as women have we like been to, going on an elevator, let's say, okay, so you're working late and you're in an elevator and, it's dark, you're by yourself and the elevator door opens and there's like a person in the elevator and your intuition says this doesn't feel safe, but you don't want to offend the person. You don't want to be that person who is like being super emotional, and you don't want to be judgmental. So even though your intuition says it does not feel safe for me to get into this steel soundproof box with something that might be threatening, I don't want to be rude. So I'm going to override my intuition that says this isn't safe. And I am going to get in there in the spirit of being polite, in the spirit of being nice. That isn't necessarily our safest choice. Your intuition is valuable. And I would prefer that we trust our intuition. And a story I shared with you on an earlier episode is I recall walking down the street and there was an unhome person who was clearly having an episode. And they approached us, and Ava was with me, and she was actually pretty rude to that person. And my instinct was to correct and be like, Ava, clearly this person's going through an episode. We can't be rude to like, don't be rude like that. And Ava said to me after we were out of that situation, she says, I will be rude to anyone who's making me feel uncomfortable because I have a right to feel safe. I was literally putting my daughter in a situation where she wasn't feeling comfortable. And here I was trying to correct her to be socially and politically and what all the things are polite when she so beautifully articulated, I will be rude to somebody if they are making me feel unsafe and uncomfortable, Mom. And I'm so, so grateful that that's how she sees the world, that she's not going to let social niceties put her in a situation where she does not feel safe. Again, that's the same as women trusting our intuition, not getting into that steel box of an elevator and soundproof, so scary, putting ourselves in situations where we don't feel safe in the spirit of being polite or nice. We want to trust our intuition. Now, randomly, just a wee while ago, speaking of elevators, I didn't realize we were going to chat about elevators, but was so interesting. A wee while ago, I was at a hotel. I was down south and I had run down to the lobby to get my food from food delivery service. So I ran downstairs, got my food, and it was a little bit later. And I came back, and I was just inside of Boston. And I came back and I was getting to go on the elevator. And I remember there was this very large dude. Like, I mean, this guy, like, clearly was a football player at some point in his life. This guy was massive. And the elevator door opened, and it was just me and my little DoorDash or whatever. And he was standing there and he looked at me and he goes, You go ahead. And I was like, Oh, thank you. And then I got in the elevator and I turned around. And he goes, I'll get the next one. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. And I was like, Oh, okay. And as the door was almost shutting, a hand reached in, and there were three people who had just come from the bar in the basement or the lobby of this hotel, and they were clearly had too much to drink. And they kind of stumbled in, and there were these three businessmen kind of stumbled in, and they turned to me and they're like, Oh, what's for dinner? And they started this conversation. And then I just remembered that gentleman who was going to let me travel by myself in the elevator. He literally walked in and like was just stood right in the middle and then they just kind of quieted, like these people that were being a little bit obnoxious, they just quieted. And then he turned around and he pushed the elevator button, and I pushed my elevator button, and I noticed he pushed the button above my button, my stranger. And I got off the elevator, and he held the door for me, and I said thank you. And he said, I have daughters. I got so emotional as I got to my room because just this idea that there are people who have this awareness that our intuition it's so important. And as soon as those people who had come in from the bar came into the elevator, my red flags were going off. I felt so uncomfortable. But just the fact that this person showed up, it was pretty significant and it reminded me of something I talk about so often when I'm doing my talks and working with people is that, we're not meant to do this alone. So being open to trusting ourselves and also recognizing that there's so much good out there in the world. Now, another idea that's getting back to this feeling setting, okay, is spending a wee bit of time with yourself to ask yourself, how do you want to feel? I know for me, I really like to feel well rested. I like to feel grounded. I like to feel well resourced. And something that I know is if I put too many things on my plate, it makes it harder for me to feel those feelings. Yes, I could squeeze things in, but I really encourage you to create patterns, create systems or protocols where you're not always trying to squeeze in one more thing. Yes, you can do it. And just because you can do it doesn't mean you have to do it. Just because you can do it doesn't mean you have to do it. And the last kind of idea about this idea of setting your feelings is I encourage you to pay attention to your energy. Pay attention to your energy when you are doing certain things and when you are around certain people or have certain things on your calendar. Notice what feels energizing. What are your energy generators? I know for me, spending time at least once a day touching my favorite self, being within my favorite self, which is playful, which is at ease, which is, again, feeling well resourced. knowing that I need to touch that kind of part of my personality at least once a day is really helpful for me. So again, knowing how it is that you want to feel, finding out what are your energy energizers, and noticing what are your energy drainers. So if you imagine this wee little battery, like what are things that charge you up and what are things that deplete you? I've shared this with you before. I know that scrolling, right? Getting stuck down some of those rabbit holes. At first, it feels kind of fun, but as I go into it longer, it doesn't feel very good. And when I'm feeling under-resourced, and perhaps when you're feeling under-resourced, avoid and ignore the behavior things or those antecedents, those triggers that are going to make it harder for you to do the things that you ought to do that make you feel good. And it's not woo-woo, it is literally science. Putting yourself in situations that you don't feel well resourced for is going to make it harder for you to make wise decisions. I remember recently, and I shared this before, I remember being at a basketball game and sitting on the sidelines and actually saying to myself, I am not evolved enough to handle this situation right now. I was so cheesed, I was so keyed up, and I'm like, I am not evolved enough. So instead of getting mad at myself that I wasn't feeling better or I couldn't manage the situation better, literally writing myself a permission slip mentally that I'm allowed to sit here and marinate in my anger and marinate in my frustration, and I didn't have to fix it. Not everything needs an action. Not everything needs a response. Sometimes just giving ourselves a permission slip to feel what we need to feel because we deserve to be well. Because when we are well, we show up for other people in a more well way. And we show up for ourselves in a more well way. So to land this little ship, hoping that this episode made it to air, I'm hoping it recorded okay. Again, I'm in a remote location. I want you to take a moment to give yourself a permission slip. You can literally write it on a post-it note. I give Robyne, AKA whatever your name is, I give myself permission to do this. Now, when I was younger, I remember my mom would write me permission slips to be able to go out for lunch when I was in high school, in early high school and in elementary school with my friends every once in a while. It was such a treat to have that permission slip that I was allowed to leave the property to walk over and get French fries with my friends at this little diner called Matt Macy's. And anyway, I want you to have that feeling of that permission slip and recognize you can write it for yourself. For whatever that self-care prescription is, whatever your permission form would say, take a moment just to grab a post-it note and say, I give your name permission to do this, to feel this, to maybe let go of this or not to do it. My last little idea I want to share with you. I was just listening to a podcast, and Michelle Obama and her brother were being interviewed by Steven, the Diary of the CEO guy. He's so cool. I love how he asks questions. But he talked about, he asked her a question, the former First Lady, Michelle Obama. He said, you chose not to go to this inauguration. And, that was like this really, bold move. And what was it about? And she responded that I've taken the high ground. I have set the example of how we should respond, how we ought to do things. She said, I've checked so many boxes. This felt like I needed to do this for Michelle. I gave myself permission to not do what the world thought I should do because I was looking after myself. And oh my gosh, when she used that language of giving myself permission, I have set the example enough that people know right and wrong. People know that we do our best. But I loved how much in her power she said, I made the decision to do what was right for me. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I feel the more that we give ourselves permission to do what we need to do to be okay, it sends the cues to other people that they too can say no to things that they don't have to do. And again, obligation isn't a reason to keep doing this stuff or, because we're supposed to. I really invite you to do what it is that will make you feel the most resourced, the most in touch with your sense of self. So that way you can continue to have the best day possible, whatever that day looks like. Okay, my friends, thank you for listening. I hope this cobbled together podcast, again, as I said, makes its way into the world. I also want to drop that invitation that the Stress Wisely Labs are around the corner. We're going to do a telegraphing exercise where we telegraph where the potential for burnout lies for each and every one of the people that are in our community of practice. It's literally like just come hang out with me as friends. Ask questions. We're going to have a great time. 90 minutes. You can't afford not to take 90 minutes for yourself. So if you're looking at something to really elevate your self-care, please join me in my Stress Wisely Lab on July 18th. And I hope to see you there. And I appreciate you hitting play on today's episode. Take good care and I'll see you next time. Bye for now. Thank you for spending time with this podcast episode today. I hope you found something helpful in Resiliency Redefined. Please feel free to share it with somebody who you might think could benefit. Maybe there was something useful, something in particular that you think you could pay forward. Also, if you have a moment, please feel free to rate and review this podcast wherever you like to listen to your podcast. It means the world to me. And again, thanks for your time. Thank you for your interest. Take good care, and I'll see you next time.